There are some stories that cling to your bones, that wrap around your heart like a cold hand and refuse to let go. Stories that begin not with a bang, but with a whisper, a secret kept for generations, buried beneath layers of ordinary life, waiting for the right moment to unravel everything you thought you knew. Here on Forgotten Ties, we often talk about the past, about the echoes that ripple through time and shape our present. But some echoes are more than just memories. They are ghosts, and they haunt those who find them in the most unexpected of places. This is a story about a woman named Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was a librarian, a quiet woman with a passion for history and a deep, almost reverent respect for old things. She wasn't one for grand gestures or dramatic revelations. Her world was one of dusty tomes, the soft rustle of pages, and the hushed sanctity of the archives. She lived in a small, meticulously neat house in suburban Connecticut, a place filled with antiques and the faint, comforting smell of lemon polish. Her life was orderly, predictable, and, for the most part, happy. She was married to a kind man, a professor named William, and they had built a life together based on shared passions and a quiet, mutual understanding. They had no children, a fact they had long ago come to terms with, filling their lives instead with books, travel, and a deep appreciation for their family histories. This particular story begins with a small, seemingly insignificant event. Eleanor's great-aunt, a formidable old woman named Agnes, had passed away. Agnes had been the last living link to a branch of the family that stretched back to the colonial era, a lineage steeped in New England tradition and a certain stubborn pride. Agnes's house, a sprawling, Gothic Revival mansion, was a treasure trove of family heirlooms, and Eleanor, as the closest living relative, was tasked with the unenviable job of sifting through it all. It was a monumental task, a physical representation of the past, and Eleanor approached it with her usual methodical calm. Room by room, she catalogued furniture, sorted through old letters, and packed away priceless artifacts. The work was tedious, but for Eleanor, it was a pilgrimage, a way of connecting with the ancestors she had only ever heard about in stories. The one item that Agnes had insisted be given directly to Eleanor was the family Bible. It was a massive, leather-bound book, its cover worn and its pages brittle with age. The leather was so dark it was almost black, and the gold leaf on its spine had long since flaked away. It was heavy, a solid weight of history and faith. Eleanor had seen it on Agnes's mantelpiece her entire life, a silent, imposing guardian of the family's legacy. Agnes had always said, "The family Bible holds the truth, Eleanor. All the truth there ever was." Eleanor had simply smiled and nodded, assuming it was a metaphorical statement about the enduring nature of faith and lineage. She had no idea how literal her great-aunt's words would turn out to be. The Bible itself was a strange artifact. It wasn't the kind of Bible you'd read daily, it was a register. The first few pages were blank, but then, inscribed in elegant, spidery script, was the family genealogy. Names, dates of birth, marriages, and deaths were all meticulously recorded. Eleanor spent an entire afternoon poring over the names, tracing her fingers over the faded ink. She found her own name, her parents', her grandparents', all neatly documented. It was a comforting act, a tangible link to a past she had always felt a part of. But as she turned the pages, a sense of unease began to stir within her. She noticed a strange pattern. The entries for her great-grandparents' generation, the generation of the Bible's original owners, were messy. Scrawled in the margins were notes, corrections, and even strike-throughs. It was a stark contrast to the perfect, deliberate handwriting of the previous entries. And then she found them. An entire page dedicated to the children of Agnes's parents. There were 4 names. Agnes. A boy named Thomas, who had died in infancy. A girl named Mary, who had died at age 3. And then, something else. 2 names were scrawled at the very bottom of the page, in a different hand, a desperate, hurried scrawl that seemed out of place. One was simply unknown, with no date, no gender, nothing. The other was listed as infant female, died with no name. Below it, in the same frantic hand, were two words that sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine: forgive us. This was the strange, cruel twist of fate that started it all. Eleanor had grown up hearing stories about the family's history, but never once had Agnes or anyone else mentioned any children other than her and her brother Thomas. Who were these unnamed children? Why were their names scrawled in such a chaotic way? Why was there a plea for forgiveness? The orderly, predictable world Eleanor had so carefully constructed for herself suddenly felt like a house of cards, its foundation shifting with every passing moment. The family Bible, once a symbol of continuity and pride, now held the names of children she never knew, names that were nothing more than a forgotten whisper, a ghostly testament to a secret buried so deep it had festered for a century. Eleanor was no longer just a librarian cataloging history. She was a detective, and the case she was about to unravel was her own family's. The first chilling discovery in the family Bible was a seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of Eleanor's mind. It took root, sending out tendrils of suspicion that wrapped around her every thought. The "Forgive Us" note, scribbled at the bottom of the page, wasn't a casual scribble. It was a desperate, almost frantic plea. It pulsed with a pain that felt too raw for a 100-year-old book. Eleanor, a woman who valued logic and order, found herself confronting an inexplicable mystery. She tried to rationalize it, to dismiss it as a momentary lapse or a family quirk she just hadn't been told about. Perhaps they were stillborns, not worthy of a proper entry? But the plea for forgiveness, that felt different. That felt personal. That felt like a secret that had been kept for a very good reason. William, her husband, a man grounded in the rational world of academia, saw it as an interesting genealogical puzzle. "It's just an old family record, Eleanor," he'd said gently. "They likely had a few miscarriages or stillbirths and just didn't speak of them. People didn't in those days. It was too painful." But Eleanor knew the difference between a sad silence and a deliberate concealment. The names unknown and infant female died were not casual omissions. They were ghosts, purposefully unnamed, their lives reduced to a haunting footnote. She started to dig deeper, her librarian's instincts taking over. She went back to Agnes's mansion, now a cold, echoing shell of a home, and began to search with a new purpose. She wasn't looking for heirlooms anymore, she was looking for answers. Her search led her to the darkest corners of the house. The attic was a labyrinth of forgotten things, a century of dust and memories. She found boxes of old photographs, their faces faded and their stories lost to time. She found trunks filled with moth-eaten clothes and letters tied with ribbons, their cursive script a window into another world. But what she was looking for wasn't a picture or a letter. She was looking for a pattern, a connection to the ghostly children in the Bible. Her breakthrough came not from finding something, but from noticing the absence of something. She found dozens of photographs of Agnes and her brother Thomas as children, playing in the garden, smiling for the camera. But there were no pictures of them with a baby, no portraits of a mother cradling an infant that could have been one of the lost children. It was a silence louder than any scream. Her investigation took a grim turn when she began sifting through Agnes's personal journals. Agnes had kept a meticulous diary for most of her life, a habit that was a source of both frustration and fascination for Eleanor. The earlier journals, those from Agnes's childhood, were filled with the mundane details of a young girl's life: piano lessons, tea parties, and a quiet longing for a doll. But there was a stark, dramatic shift in her entries around the time the infant female died was noted in the Bible. The cheerful, innocent tone vanished, replaced by a brooding, melancholic despair. The entries became cryptic, filled with half-sentences and fragmented thoughts. "The secret is safe," one entry read. "He will never know." And then, a few pages later, "The price of silence is paid in fear." The handwriting, once so neat and deliberate, was shaky and erratic, as if written by a trembling hand. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest as she pieced together the puzzle. The journals mentioned the accident. Not a car accident, but an incident in the family's old mill. The mill had been the source of their family's wealth, a grand structure on the property that had since been torn down. The journal entries described it with a chilling vagueness: The wheel turns for all of us, and the little one was too close. The more she read, the more a terrifying narrative began to form in her mind. It wasn't just a simple tragedy. It was a cover-up. The names in the Bible weren't just miscarriages. They were children who had lived, however briefly, and then disappeared under mysterious, possibly sinister, circumstances. Eleanor began to suspect her great-grandmother, a woman she had always known only through faded photographs, as a stern, unsmiling matriarch. The journal entries hinted at her great-grandmother's controlling nature, her obsession with appearances, and a deep-seated fear of scandal. The "Forgive us" note, Eleanor now suspected, was a plea from her great-grandfather, a man torn between his conscience and his wife's fierce desire to protect the family name. The unknown child. Who was that? Why was that name so completely erased from history? The infant female died was a tragic note, but the unknown felt different. It felt like a deliberate act of historical erasure. The family Bible, once a testament to their legacy, now felt like a tombstone, holding the names of children whose lives were never truly lived, whose stories were brutally silenced to preserve a family's reputation. Eleanor's world, once so predictable and calm, was now a minefield of secrets, and she had just stepped on the first one. The weight of the new information was crushing. The family Bible, once a mere object, had become a portal to a hidden world of deceit and tragedy. The cryptic entries in Agnes's journal and the chilling absence of photographs had painted a picture far darker than Eleanor could have ever imagined. It wasn't just a sad story of infant loss, it was a conspiracy, a brutal act of erasure designed to protect the Vance family's reputation. The name unknown haunted her most of all. Who was this child, so completely wiped from existence that they didn't even merit a tragic footnote? The infant female died was sad, but the other name was terrifying. It was the name of a person who never was. Eleanor returned to the old mansion, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities and fear. The house, once a comforting relic of the past, now felt like a mausoleum. She focused her search on the area where the family's old mill had stood, a long-forgotten part of the property now overgrown with weeds and thorny bushes. The mill itself had been torn down decades ago, but she remembered a small, crumbling stone foundation that remained. As she sifted through the rubble, her foot caught on something. She bent down, pushing aside a tangle of ivy, and uncovered a small, wooden box, rotten and warped by years of rain. It was sealed with a rusty metal latch, a lock that had long since surrendered to the elements. Inside, nestled among fragments of a child's toy and a few faded ribbons, was another journal. This one was different. Its leather cover was not worn, but scarred, as if it had been thrown, a testament to a person in deep emotional distress. The handwriting was not Agnes's, it was her great-grandmother's, the matriarch who had so terrified Agnes. This journal was not a meticulous record of daily life. It was a confession. The first few pages were a frantic, rambling account of a scandal, an affair her great-grandfather had with a servant girl, a young woman who worked in the mill. The journal described the girl's quiet beauty and her great-grandfather's momentary lapse of judgment, a fleeting affair born of loneliness and proximity. The journal confessed to a child, a son, born of that illicit union. The child was the unknown from the Bible. The pages that followed were a descent into madness. The great-grandmother, a woman of rigid societal norms, was consumed by a quiet fury. The diary detailed her plan to rid the family of the stain. She would not allow her husband's illegitimate child to live, to be a constant reminder of his betrayal. The entries were a chilling litany of a mother's monstrous plan. The great-grandmother had orchestrated the accident at the mill, a horrifying act that she had disguised as a tragic mishap. She had lured the servant and her child to the mill on the pretense of a job, and in a fit of cold, calculated rage, she had pushed the woman into the mill wheel. The infant was left to die of exposure, its cries swallowed by the roar of the mill and the rushing water. The entries concluded with a chillingly detached confession: the stain has been removed. The family name is clean. Eleanor stumbled back, the journal falling from her hands onto the damp ground. The world swam around her. The "forgive us" note, the one that had haunted her for weeks, now made sense. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness from God, it was a plea from her great-grandfather, a man trapped in a marriage with a monster, forced to live with the knowledge of his wife's brutal crime. That infant female died was a terrible footnote, a child whose life was sacrificed to protect the family's name, a life that was so unimportant it didn't even deserve its own name. And the unknown? That was the son, the illegitimate child, the true victim of her great-grandmother's sociopathic obsession with purity. The secrets in the family Bible were not just whispers from the past, they were the screams of two innocent children, silenced by a family that valued reputation over humanity. Eleanor's quiet, predictable life had been a lie. The family she had so admired, the lineage she had so proudly traced, was built on a foundation of murder and deceit. The comforting smell of lemon polish in her meticulously neat house no longer felt comforting. It felt like a thin veneer of civility covering up a century-old atrocity. The family Bible was not a sacred text, it was a chronicle of murder, and the names of the children she never knew were not just names. They were the ghosts of her family's brutal, unforgivable past. Eleanor was no longer a detective. She was a witness to a family secret so horrifying it made her question everything she thought she knew about herself and her ancestors. The weight of that knowledge was a heavy chain around her heart, and she knew she could never again look at her family's history in the same way. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that broke Eleanor's heart and spirit, was a small, tattered letter she found tucked inside the confession journal. It was addressed to Agnes from her great-grandfather, a final, desperate plea for understanding and forgiveness. The handwriting was shaky, the ink bled, as if the writer had been crying. The letter was a heartbreaking testament to a man's silent, agonizing suffering. He wrote about the unbearable burden of his wife's crime, the way the accident at the mill had hollowed him out, leaving him an empty shell of a man. He confessed to Agnes that he had found the little boy, his own son, in the ruins of the mill and had secretly buried him in an unmarked grave near the riverbank. He couldn't bring himself to write the boy's name, not even in his own diary. He had only scrawled "unknown" in the family Bible, a silent protest against the brutal erasure of his son's existence. He begged Agnes to understand, to forgive him for his weakness, for not standing up to his wife, for allowing a monster to live and thrive in their midst. The letter ended with a final, devastating line. "The sins of our family are a sickness, my dear child. A sickness that will haunt us for generations." This wasn't a warning, it was a prophecy. Eleanor felt the full weight of that prophecy, the weight of a century of silence. The family she had held in such high regard was not a line of proud, upstanding citizens. It was a line of complicity, of people who had been forced to live with a horrifying secret, a secret that had festered and soured their lives. Agnes's melancholic entries, her deep-seated fear, her almost obsessive need to keep the family Bible safe, it all made a terrible, tragic sense. She hadn't been protecting the family, she had been guarding a tomb. Eleanor took the journals, the letter, and the family Bible and placed them in her husband William's study. She didn't know what to do with the truth. How could she? It wasn't a secret you could just share at a family reunion. It was a truth that was so horrifying it felt like a violation. William, ever the rational mind, was speechless. He read the journals and the letter, his face pale with a mixture of disbelief and horror. The family he had married into, the lineage he had so respected, was built on a lie. He looked at Eleanor, his wife, a woman who had spent her entire life with a quiet reverence for a family that had committed a monstrous crime, and he saw the profound sadness in her eyes. The secret was no longer just a ghost, it was a living wound, and Eleanor was the one left to bear the pain. The story of the Vance family is a cautionary tale, a brutal reminder that the past is never truly dead. It is not something that you can simply bury and forget. It is a living, breathing entity, and it waits for the opportune moment to surface, to demand a reckoning. The family Bible, once a symbol of continuity and faith, was in fact a ledger of life and death, of a secret so profound and so cruel it had rippled through time, haunting generations with its silent, brutal truth. The names of the children she never knew were not just names on a page. They were the names of her family's victims, of lives that were never truly lived, of stories that were brutally silenced. The irony, the profound and heartbreaking irony, is that Eleanor, a woman who had dedicated her life to preserving history, had uncovered a truth that was so painful it made her want to burn it all down. But she couldn't. Because the truth, no matter how ugly, is still the truth. And it is the only way forward. For Eleanor, the journey was not about finding the truth, it was about living with it. It was a journey of coming to terms with the fact that her family's past was stained with the blood of the innocent, and that the only way to honor their memory was to never, ever let them be forgotten again. And that, my friends, is the story of Eleanor Vance and the family Bible that held the names of children she never knew. If this story resonated with you, if it sent a chill down your spine, or if you simply can't get enough of these dark, twisted tales, I encourage you to do a few things. First, make sure you hit that like button. It helps us know what kind of stories you want to hear. Second, subscribe to our channel, Forgotten Ties, so you don't miss a single one of our videos. And finally, turn on those notifications by hitting that bell icon. The past is full of secrets, and you never know when the next one will surface. Until next time, stay vigilant, and remember, the ties that bind us are sometimes the ones that haunt us.